The February wind cut through Laura Morgan like 1,000 frozen knives as she stood in the doorway of what had been her home for the past 3 years, watching two men carry out the last of her meager furniture into the snow-covered street of Georgetown, Colorado Territory, in the year 1878. "Please," she said, her voice barely above a whisper as she clutched her threadbare shawl tighter around her shoulders. "Just give me another week. I can get the money." The banker's representative, a portly man with a thick mustache and no sympathy in his cold eyes, shook his head firmly. "Mrs. Morgan, we have given you 3 months already. Your husband's debts do not disappear simply because he has passed. The bank owns this property now, and we have a new tenant moving in tomorrow." Laura felt her knees threaten to buckle. Samuel had been dead for 8 months, taken by pneumonia during the harsh summer that had surprised everyone with its unseasonable cold. She had tried everything to keep up with the payments on their small house, taking in washing, mending clothes, even selling her wedding ring. But Georgetown was a mining town, and when the silver started running thin in some of the smaller operations, people had less money to spare. The work had dried up along with her savings. "Where am I supposed to go?" she asked, hating the desperation in her voice but unable to hide it. "It is the middle of winter." The representative's expression did not change. "That is not the bank's concern, madam. You should have thought of that before you failed to make your payments." He gestured to his men, who were already climbing back into their wagon. "You have until sunset to remove yourself from the premises." Laura stood in the doorway as they drove away, their wagon wheels cutting deep tracks through the fresh snow that had fallen during the night. She was 24 years old, a widow with no family, no money, and in less than 4 hours, no home. The sky above was a threatening gray, promising more snow before nightfall. She turned back into the empty house, her footsteps echoing hollowly on the bare wooden floors. They had taken everything except for a small trunk containing her clothes and a few personal items, which sat lonely in the center of what had been her bedroom. She had pawned or sold everything else over the past months, trying desperately to scrape together enough to satisfy the bank. Laura sank down onto the trunk, finally allowing herself to cry. The tears came hot and fast, streaming down her cheeks as the reality of her situation crashed over her like a wave. She had nowhere to go, no one to turn to. Samuel's family back in Missouri had cut ties with them when he decided to seek his fortune in the Colorado Territory. Her own parents had died of cholera when she was 16, and her only brother had gone to California years ago. She had not heard from him in over 5 years. The cold was already seeping into the house without a fire in the stove. She had burned the last of her firewood 2 days ago, unable to afford more. She pulled her shawl tighter and tried to think, but her mind kept circling back to the same impossible question. What was she going to do? She could not stay in Georgetown. Everyone knew everyone in a town this size, and word of her eviction would spread quickly. The few friends she had made were struggling themselves, barely able to feed their own families. She could not impose on them, even if they offered. The nearest town was Silver Plume, about 2 miles up the mountain, but she had no connections there either. A knock at the door startled her from her thoughts. She wiped her eyes quickly and stood, smoothing her worn dress as best she could. When she opened the door, she found herself looking up at a tall man she had seen around town but never spoken to. He was perhaps 30 years old, with dark hair that touched his collar and eyes the color of a summer sky. He wore a heavy sheepskin coat and a hat dusted with snow, and he held his hat respectfully in his hands as he looked down at her. "Mrs. Morgan," he said, his voice deep and gentle. "Yes," Laura replied, trying to keep her voice steady despite her tear-stained cheeks. "My name is Frank Garrett." I own a ranch about 5 miles west of town. I heard about your situation, and I wanted to offer you a place to stay." Laura stared at him, certain she had misheard. "I am sorry, what?" Frank shifted his weight, looking slightly uncomfortable but determined. "I know how this must sound, madam, but I assure you my intentions are honorable. I have a cabin on my property, separate from the main house. It has been empty since my foreman moved back east last fall. You could stay there, at least until the weather clears and you can figure out your next steps." "I do not understand," Laura said slowly. "Why would you do this? You do not even know me." "No, madam, I do not. But I knew your husband, at least a little. He helped me once when my wagon broke down on the road to town. Refused to take any payment for it, said neighbors should help neighbors. I have been meaning to pay that kindness forward, and when I heard what happened today, well, it seemed like the right time." Laura felt fresh tears threatening. "Mr. Garrett, that is incredibly kind, but I could not possibly accept. I have no way to pay you, and I would not want anyone to think that I was." She trailed off, not sure how to finish the sentence delicately. Frank's expression remained earnest. "Mrs. Morgan, I am not asking for anything in return. The cabin is sitting empty anyway. You would actually be doing me a favor. I have been worried about squatters or animals getting in there and causing damage. Having someone living in it would keep it in good shape. And before you worry about what people might think, I should tell you that my ranch hand, Miguel, lives in the bunkhouse with his wife, Rosa. She could use some help with the cooking and household work if you were willing. I would pay you fair wages for that, enough to start saving again." Laura searched his face, looking for any hint of deception or ulterior motive, but found only honest concern. She thought of the empty house behind her, the encroaching cold and the darkening sky. She thought of trying to find shelter in a town where every door would likely be closed to her, where charity was scarce and suspicion abundant. "I do not know what to say," she whispered. "Say yes," Frank replied simply. "Let me help you, Mrs. Morgan. No strings attached." Just one human being helping another on a cold winter day. The first snowflakes of the evening began to fall, drifting down between them like frozen stars. Laura took a shaky breath and nodded. "Yes, thank you, Mr. Garrett. I accept your generous offer." The relief on his face was genuine, warming something in Laura's chest despite the bitter cold. "Good. I have my wagon just down the street. Let me help you with your things." Between the two of them, it took only minutes to load her single trunk and the few bundles she had managed to set aside into the back of Frank's wagon. As they worked, Laura caught sight of Mrs. Henderson watching from across the street, her expression pinched with disapproval. Laura lifted her chin and turned away. Let people think what they wanted. She was doing what she had to do to survive. The ride out to Frank's ranch took nearly an hour through the deepening snow. The wagon followed a well-worn track that climbed gradually out of the valley where Georgetown sat, following the clear creek as it wound through the mountains. Frank kept the horses to a steady pace, clearly familiar with every turn and dip in the road. "I bought the ranch about 5 years ago," Frank said, breaking the silence that had fallen between them. "It had been abandoned for a while after the original owner died. I spent the first 2 years just fixing it up, making it livable again. Now I have about 200 head of cattle, some horses, and a few dozen chickens that Rosa tends." "That sounds like a lot of work for one man," Laura observed. "It is, but Miguel is worth 3 men on his own. And Rosa, well, she keeps us all fed and the house from falling into complete chaos." "They are good people. You will like them." Laura nodded, not trusting her voice. The reality of what she had agreed to was starting to sink in. She was going to be living on a stranger's ranch, dependent on his charity. The thought made her uncomfortable, despite Frank's obvious kindness. She had always prided herself on standing on her own 2 feet, and now here she was, accepting handouts from a man she barely knew. As if sensing her thoughts, Frank glanced over at her. "Mrs. Morgan, I want you to know that I meant what I said about the work. Rosa has been asking me for help for months now, especially with the cooking and cleaning. She has arthritis in her hands that flares up something fierce in the winter. Having you there would genuinely make her life easier and mine too. This is not charity. You will be earning your keep." His words eased some of the tightness in Laura's chest. "I am a hard worker, Mr. Garrett. I will not disappoint you." "I do not doubt that for a second, madam." The ranch came into view as they crested a small rise, and despite her anxiety, Laura felt a flutter of appreciation. The main house was a solid structure built of logs and stone, with smoke curling from 2 chimneys. A large barn stood nearby, along with several other outbuildings. The cabin Frank had mentioned sat perhaps 100 yards from the main house, nestled against a stand of pine trees that would provide shelter from the worst of the wind. Everything was covered in a blanket of white, and in the fading light of dusk, it looked almost magical. Laura could see cattle huddled together in a large corral near the barn, and the warm glow of lamplight shone from the windows of the main house. Frank drove the wagon directly to the cabin and helped Laura down before unhitching the horses. "Let me get these animals settled, and then I will show you around inside. I had Miguel lay a fire earlier today, so it should be warming up nicely." Laura climbed the 2 steps to the cabin's porch and pushed open the door. The interior was simple but clean, consisting of a single large room with a stone fireplace at one end, a small kitchen area with a cast iron stove, and a sleeping area partitioned off by a curtain. The fire Frank had mentioned was indeed crackling merrily in the fireplace, filling the space with welcome warmth. It was small and plain, but after hours of imagining herself sleeping in the snow or in some abandoned mine shaft, it looked like a palace to Laura. She walked to the fireplace and held her hands out to the flames, feeling the heat seep into her frozen fingers. Frank returned a few minutes later carrying her trunk. He set it down near the bed area and then stood somewhat awkwardly by the door. "The bed is made up with fresh linens. Rosa insisted on that when I told her you were coming. There is food in the pantry, enough to last you a few days. The stove works well once you get it going, and there is a good supply of wood stacked on the back porch. This is wonderful, Mr. Garrett. Truly, I cannot thank you enough." He waved away her gratitude. "No need for thanks, Mrs. Morgan. I will let you get settled tonight. Come up to the main house tomorrow morning, say around 7. Rosa usually has breakfast ready by then, and we can discuss what kind of help she needs most." After Frank left, Laura stood in the center of the cabin and slowly turned in a circle, taking it all in. She had gone from homeless and desperate to having a warm, safe place to stay, all in the span of a few hours. It seemed almost too good to be true, and a small voice in the back of her mind warned her to be cautious, to watch for whatever catch must surely exist. But as she unpacked her few belongings and made herself a simple supper from the supplies in the pantry, she could not help but feel a tiny spark of hope. Maybe, just maybe, things were going to be all right after all. The next morning dawned clear and brutally cold. Laura woke before sunrise, dressed in her warmest clothes, and made her way carefully through the snow to the main house. The sky was just beginning to lighten in the east, painting the snow-covered peaks pink and gold. She knocked tentatively on the back door, and it was opened almost immediately by a small, round woman with gray-streaked black hair and warm brown eyes. "You must be Laura," the woman said, her accent marking her as Mexican. "I am Rosa. Come in before you freeze." Laura stepped into a kitchen that smelled heavenly, rich with the scents of coffee, bacon, and fresh bread. The warmth enveloped her like a hug. "Sit, sit," Rosa instructed, gesturing to a long wooden table. "You must be half frozen. Miguel, get this poor girl some coffee." A wiry man with a weathered face and kind eyes appeared from another room, already holding a steaming mug. "Welcome, Senora. Frank told us you would be coming. We are very glad to have you here." Laura accepted the coffee gratefully, wrapping her cold hands around the warm mug. "Thank you both for your kindness. Mr. Garrett mentioned that you could use some help, Rosa." Rosa laughed, a warm, rich sound. "Could I use help? Santa Maria, yes. These hands of mine, they are not what they used to be. And feeding 3 hungry men every day, plus the extra hands when we have them, it is much work. But you should eat first. Then we will talk." Frank appeared a few minutes later, stamping snow from his boots. He looked surprised to see Laura already there. "Mrs. Morgan, I did not expect you quite this early. I hope you slept well." "Very well, thank you. The cabin is lovely." They shared breakfast together around the large table, and Laura found herself relaxing despite her initial nervousness. Rosa was cheerful and talkative. Miguel was quiet but friendly, and Frank was courteous and kind. The conversation flowed easily, mostly about the ranch and the work that needed doing. After the meal, Rosa showed Laura around the kitchen and explained the daily routine. There were 3 meals to prepare each day, dishes to wash, floors to sweep, and bread to bake. Rosa did the marketing when they went into town, but Laura would be responsible for preparing most of the meals and keeping the house clean. "Frank, he is a good man," Rosa confided as they worked together to clean up from breakfast. "But he knows nothing about keeping a house. Before Miguel and I came, he was living like an animal, I swear. Eating cold beans from a can and sleeping in his clothes." Laura smiled at the image. "He seems very kind. I am grateful he offered me a place to stay." Rosa gave her a shrewd look. "He is kind, yes, but he is also lonely. 5 years he has been on this ranch, working from dawn to dark. No wife, no family, just the cattle and the land. It is not good for a man to be so alone." Laura felt her cheeks warm and busied herself with drying a plate. "I am sure he will find someone when he is ready." "Perhaps he already has," Rosa said quietly, but when Laura looked up, the older woman had moved on to another task, humming to herself. The days that followed fell into a comfortable rhythm. Laura rose early each morning, helped Rosa prepare breakfast, and then spent the day cooking, cleaning, and learning the ins and outs of running a ranch household. Rosa was patient and kind, teaching her how to make the hearty meals the men needed, how to stretch supplies when necessary, and how to keep a house warm and welcoming despite the harsh winter conditions. In return, Laura's presence allowed Rosa to rest her aching hands and take on lighter tasks. The older woman's relief and gratitude were genuine, which eased Laura's conscience about accepting help. Frank was often out working on the ranch during the day, but he joined them for meals, and Laura found herself looking forward to these times more than she wanted to admit. He was intelligent and thoughtful, with a quiet sense of humor that caught her off guard. He treated her with respect and never made her feel like she was a burden or an obligation. One evening about 2 weeks after her arrival, a fierce storm blew in from the mountains, bringing heavy snow and howling winds. Laura was in the main house helping Rosa prepare supper when Frank burst through the door, covered in snow and clearly agitated. "One of the cattle shelters collapsed under the snow weight," he said, already grabbing extra rope from a storage closet. "Miguel and I need to get the cattle moved before they freeze. Rosa, we might be out there for a while." "Be careful," Rosa said, worry creasing her face. "This storm is a bad one." After the men left, Laura and Rosa kept the stove burning hot and prepared extra coffee and food for when they returned. The wind screamed around the house, and snow pelted against the windows with a sound like thrown sand. Laura found herself pacing anxiously, thinking of Frank and Miguel out in that terrible cold. It was nearly midnight when they finally stumbled back in, both men practically frozen solid. Their eyebrows and beards were thick with ice, and they were shaking so hard they could barely remove their coats. "Get them by the fire," Rosa instructed, and Laura jumped to help. She guided Frank to a chair near the fireplace while Rosa tended to Miguel. His hands were like ice, and Laura chafed them gently between her own, trying to restore circulation. "Are you hurt?" she asked, searching his face with concern. "No, just cold," Frank managed through chattering teeth. "We got them all moved. They should be safe now." "You could have died out there," Laura said, surprised by the intensity of her own emotion. "For a few cattle. Those cattle are our livelihood," Frank replied, his eyes meeting hers. "And it is my responsibility to care for them. But I appreciate your concern, Mrs. Morgan." There was something in his gaze that made Laura's breath catch. She looked away quickly, focusing on warming his hands. But she was intensely aware of his presence, of the strength in his cold fingers, of the way he looked at her. Rosa insisted that both men eat something hot before they went to bed, and Laura helped her serve up bowls of thick stew and mugs of steaming coffee. As she set Frank's bowl in front of him, their fingers brushed, and she felt a jolt of something she had not experienced in a very long time. That night, lying alone in her cabin with the storm still raging outside, Laura allowed herself to acknowledge what she had been trying to ignore for days. She was developing feelings for Frank Garrett. The realization terrified her. Samuel had been dead for less than a year. What kind of woman developed feelings for another man so soon? But even as guilt washed over her, she could not deny the truth. Frank made her feel safe and valued in ways Samuel never really had. Samuel had been a dreamer, always chasing the next opportunity, the next big strike. He had loved her in his way, but he had never really seen her, never really paid attention to what she needed or wanted. Frank was different. He noticed when she was tired and insisted she rest. He thanked her for every meal, even though he was paying her wages. He asked her opinion on things and seemed genuinely interested in her thoughts. He treated her like a partner, not a possession. The storm lasted 3 days, keeping everyone close to the house. Laura and Rosa cooked and cleaned while Frank and Miguel tended to the animals and made repairs as best they could. The forced proximity gave Laura more opportunities to observe Frank, and what she saw only deepened her growing attraction. He was unfailingly kind to everyone, from the way he spoke gently to the horses to how he patiently answered Rosa's endless questions about ranch matters. He worked harder than anyone Laura had ever known, often the first up in the morning and the last to bed at night. And despite the obvious hardships of ranch life, he seemed genuinely content with his choices. When the storm finally broke, the world outside was transformed into a glittering wonderland of snow and ice. Frank declared a partial day of rest, and after the morning chores were done, he surprised Laura by asking if she would like to see more of the ranch. "I would love to," she said, pleased by the invitation. They bundled up warmly, and Frank led her on a walking tour of the property. The snow was deep, but he broke trail ahead of her, making it easier for her to follow. He showed her the main pastures, now blanketed in white, and the creek that provided water for the cattle. He pointed out the boundaries of his land and talked about his plans for the future. "I want to expand the herd," he said as they stood on a rise overlooking the valley. "Build another barn, maybe bring in some sheep as well. Diversification is important. If the cattle market crashes, I want to have other sources of income." "It sounds like you have thought it through carefully," Laura observed. "I try to. This ranch is everything to me. It represents freedom and independence. I spent 10 years working for other people, saving every penny before I could afford to buy this place. I will not lose it through poor planning or laziness." "Where did you come from originally?" Laura asked, realizing how little she actually knew about him. "Ohio. My father had a small farm there. I am the youngest of 6 sons, so there was no land for me to inherit. I came west to make my own way, worked cattle drives, mining camps, lumber operations. I did whatever I could to save money." He paused, looking out at the snow-covered landscape. "What about you, Mrs. Morgan? Where are you from?" "Missouri originally. A small town called Independence. My parents had a dry goods store there. After they died, my brother and I went our separate ways. He wanted to find gold in California. I wanted stability, security. I thought Samuel could give me that. But he could not." Laura shook her head. "Samuel was a good man, but he was a dreamer. Always convinced the next opportunity would make us rich. He spent more than he earned, borrowed money he could not pay back. I tried to talk sense into him, but he would not listen. And then he got sick and it all fell apart." "I am sorry," Frank said quietly. "That must have been very difficult." "It was. But I am learning that sometimes difficulties lead to better things. If none of that had happened, I would not be here now." Frank looked at her, and the intensity in his blue eyes made her heart skip. "I am glad you are here, Mrs. Morgan, very glad indeed." They walked back to the house in companionable silence, but Laura's mind was spinning. Had Frank meant what she thought he meant? Was there a possibility that he felt the same attraction she did? As February turned into March, the worst of the winter weather began to ease, though snow still fell regularly and the temperatures remained cold. Laura had fully settled into her role on the ranch, and the work gave her a sense of purpose she had not felt in years. She was good at what she did, and she knew it. The men always had hot, nutritious meals waiting for them. The house was clean and comfortable. Rosa's hands were healing, no longer constantly red and swollen. But more than the work, it was the people that made the ranch feel like home. Miguel and Rosa treated her like family, and Frank made her feel things she had thought she would never feel again. One afternoon in mid-March, Frank found Laura in the kitchen kneading bread dough. Rosa had gone to lie down with a headache, and Miguel was in town picking up supplies. "Mrs. Morgan, could I speak with you for a moment?" Frank asked, his expression serious. Laura's heart jumped. "Of course. Is something wrong?" "No, nothing is wrong. I just wanted to discuss your wages. I feel like I am not paying you enough for all the work you do." "I would like to increase your salary." "Mr. Garrett, you are already being more than generous," Laura protested. "You have given me a home and employment when I had nothing. I could not possibly ask for more." "You are not asking, I am offering." "Mrs. Morgan, Laura, if I may, you have been a godsend to this ranch. Not just because of the work you do, though that is certainly valuable, but because you have brought life and warmth to this place. You have no idea how lonely it was before you came." Laura's hands stilled in the dough. "I have been lonely too," she admitted quietly. "For a long time, even before Samuel died. This ranch, working here, being part of something, it has given me back a sense of myself that I had lost." Frank stepped closer, and Laura could smell the clean scent of soap and leather that clung to him. "Laura, I need to tell you something, and I hope I am not overstepping, but I have developed feelings for you. Strong feelings. I know it is too soon, and I know you are still mourning your husband, but I cannot keep pretending I see you only as an employee. You mean more to me than that." Laura's breath caught. She had hoped, but hearing the words spoken aloud made them real in a way that both thrilled and terrified her. Frank, I feel the same way. I have for weeks now, but I feel so guilty. Samuel has been gone less than a year. What kind of woman does that make me? It makes you human, Frank said gently. He reached out and covered her flour-dusted hand with his. Laura, you do not owe your late husband eternal grief, especially given how he left you in such difficult circumstances. You have every right to move forward with your life to find happiness again. I do care for you, Laura whispered. More than I should, perhaps. You have been so kind to me, so good, but I am afraid. What if this is just gratitude? What if I am confusing appreciation for something deeper? Frank was quiet for a moment, considering her words. That is a fair concern. I will not push you, Laura. Take all the time you need. But know that I am here and my feelings are not going anywhere. When you are ready, if you are ever ready, I will be waiting. The honesty and patience in his words made Laura's eyes sting with tears. She turned her hand in his, lacing their fingers together. Thank you for understanding, and for giving me time. I would give you anything, Frank said simply, and the sincerity in his voice made Laura's heart swell. Over the following weeks, their relationship shifted subtly. They were still proper and respectful, mindful of Rosa and Miguel's presence, but there was a new awareness between them. Frank found excuses to be near Laura, helping her carry water or wood, staying to talk after meals. Laura caught herself watching for him during the day, listening for the sound of his boots on the porch. Rosa noticed, of course. The older woman was far too observant to miss the looks exchanged across the dinner table or the way Frank's face lit up whenever Laura entered a room. You are good for him, Rosa told Laura one morning as they worked together in the kitchen. I have never seen him so happy. He is good for me too, Laura admitted. But Rosa, is it wrong? Samuel has been gone less than a year. Rosa made a dismissive sound. Life is for the living, Mija. Your Samuel, may he rest in peace, he is gone. You are still here, still young, still with your whole life ahead of you. Why should you spend it alone when there is a good man who wants to care for you? I suppose you are right. It just feels too fast somehow. The heart knows what it knows, Rosa said wisely. And your heart knows that Frank Garrett is a good man who will treat you well. That is enough. In early April, as the snow finally began to melt in earnest and the first hints of green appeared in the meadows, Frank asked Laura to go riding with him. She had not been on a horse since arriving at the ranch, and she felt nervous as Frank helped her mount a gentle mare named Daisy. I have got you, he assured her, his hand steadying her as she found her seat. Daisy is as calm as they come. She will take good care of you. They rode out across the ranch, following the creek as it tumbled down from the high country. The air was crisp and clean, filled with the scent of pine and melting snow. Birds sang in the trees, and Laura spotted a deer watching them from the edge of the forest. Frank led them to a meadow where the snow had melted entirely, revealing green grass and the first wildflowers of spring. He helped Laura dismount, and they stood together looking at the valley spread out below them. This is my favorite spot on the ranch, Frank said. I come here when I need to think, when I need to remember why I work so hard. It reminds me of what I am building, what I am working toward. It is beautiful, Laura agreed. You must be very proud of what you have accomplished. I am. But I am also lonely, Laura. I have this beautiful land, a successful ranch, everything I thought I wanted. But at the end of the day, I come home to an empty house and an empty life. Until you came. You changed everything. Laura turned to look at him, seeing the vulnerability in his expression. You changed everything for me too. When I was evicted, I thought my life was over. I had no hope, no future. And then you appeared, like something out of a dream, and offered me a chance to start again. It was not entirely selfless, Frank admitted. I saw you standing in that doorway, trying so hard to be brave, and something in my chest just cracked open. I knew I had to help you, had to know you." "Is that strange?" "No," Laura whispered. "Not strange at all." Frank reached out and cupped her face gently in his hand. "May I kiss you, Laura?" She nodded, unable to speak, and he leaned down slowly, giving her every opportunity to pull away. But she did not want to pull away. She wanted this, wanted him, with an intensity that surprised her. When his lips met hers, it was gentle at first, almost tentative. But as Laura responded, wrapping her arms around his neck, the kiss deepened into something that spoke of loneliness ending and hope beginning. When they finally pulled apart, both were breathing hard. "I love you," Frank said, his forehead resting against hers. "I know it is fast and maybe I should not say it yet, but I do. I love you, Laura Morgan." "I love you too," Laura replied, the words feeling right in a way nothing had felt right in years. "I love you, Frank Garrett." They stood there in the meadow, holding each other as the spring breeze blew around them, and Laura felt something inside her that had been frozen for a very long time finally begin to thaw. That evening, Frank asked Miguel and Rosa to join them in the parlor after supper. Laura sat beside Frank on the settee, her hand clasped in his, feeling nervous but happy. "Rosa, Miguel, I have asked you here because you are family to me," Frank began. "And I want you to be the first to know that I have asked Laura to marry me, and she has accepted." Rosa let out a delighted cry and rushed to embrace Laura. "Oh, Mija, I am so happy for you. I knew this would happen. I told Miguel just last week." Miguel shook Frank's hand warmly. "Congratulations, my friend. You have chosen well. Laura is a good woman. When is the wedding?" Rosa asked, already planning. "It must be soon, yes. No need to wait when you know it is right." Laura felt her cheeks warm. "We have not discussed that yet." Frank squeezed her hand. "I was thinking about a month from now, if that is agreeable to Laura. It would give us time to plan properly and for Laura to have a dress made if she wishes." "A month is perfect," Laura agreed. "Small and simple, just the four of us and perhaps the minister from town." "Nonsense," Rosa declared. "You will have a proper wedding. I will make the food, and we will invite the neighbors. Everyone should celebrate such a happy occasion." Over the following weeks, the ranch buzzed with wedding preparations. Rosa took charge with the enthusiasm of a general planning a campaign. She enlisted Miguel to help clean and prepare the barn for the reception, sent Frank into town multiple times for supplies, and worked with Laura to plan the menu. Laura found a dressmaker in Georgetown willing to make a simple but elegant wedding dress in cream-colored silk. It was not as elaborate as her first wedding dress had been, but Laura loved it even more. It felt like a new beginning, not a repeat of the past. As the wedding day approached, Laura found herself marveling at how much her life had changed in just 3 months. She had gone from being evicted into the snow with no hope and no future to preparing to marry a man she loved deeply and who loved her in return. The ranch had become her home, Rosa and Miguel her family, and Frank, well, Frank had become everything. The night before the wedding, Rosa insisted that Laura stay in the main house in the guest room, upholding the tradition that the bride and groom should not see each other before the ceremony. Laura lay in bed, too excited to sleep, thinking about the journey that had brought her to this moment. She thought about Samuel, and for the first time in months, the thought came without guilt or pain. She had loved him and she had mourned him, but he was part of her past. Frank was her future, and she was ready to embrace that future with open arms and an open heart. The wedding day dawned bright and clear, with a warmth in the air that promised summer was not far behind. Laura dressed with Rosa's help, and the older woman fussed over every detail, making sure every hair was in place and the dress hung perfectly. "You look beautiful," Rosa said, tears in her eyes. "Frank will forget how to breathe when he sees you." The ceremony was held outside in the same meadow where Frank had first kissed Laura. The minister from Georgetown performed the service, and about 20 neighbors and friends from town had made the journey to attend. Laura had worried that people might judge her for remarrying so quickly, but if anyone had negative thoughts, they kept them to themselves. The faces she saw were happy and supportive. Frank waited at the makeshift altar wearing a new suit, his hair neatly combed and his eyes bright with emotion. When Laura appeared at the top of the small rise and began walking toward him, his expression made her heart soar. He looked at her like she was the most precious thing in the world, like he could not believe his good fortune. Miguel walked her down the grassy aisle, having insisted on standing in as her family. When he placed her hand in Frank's, he whispered, "Be happy, Mija. You both deserve it." The ceremony was simple but heartfelt. They exchanged traditional vows, promising to love and honor each other through all the days of their lives. When the minister pronounced them husband and wife, Frank kissed her with such tender passion that the assembled guests erupted in cheers and applause. The reception in the barn was lively and joyful. Rosa had outdone herself with the food, preparing a feast that had everyone going back for seconds and thirds. There was dancing to fiddle music, toasts that ranged from heartfelt to humorous, and a palpable sense of community and celebration. As the sun began to set, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold, Frank pulled Laura aside for a private moment. They stood together at the edge of the barn, watching the last rays of sunlight glint off the snow-capped peaks in the distance. "Happy, Mrs. Garrett?" Frank asked, his arm around her waist. "More than I can say," Laura replied, leaning into his embrace. "I never thought I could feel this way again. You have given me so much, Frank. A home, a purpose, a future. But most of all, you have given me love." "You have given me all those things too," Frank said softly. "This ranch was just a place before you came. Now it is a home. You make everything better, Laura. You make me better." They stood there as the stars began to appear in the darkening sky, holding each other close. In the barn behind them, the party continued with laughter and music. But in that moment, Laura and Frank existed in their own world, wrapped in love and promise and hope for all the tomorrows stretching out before them. That night, after the guests had departed and Rosa and Miguel had retired to their quarters, Frank carried Laura over the threshold of the main house. They had decided that Laura would move into the main house now that they were married, and Frank had spent days preparing the bedroom to welcome her. He set her down gently in the center of the room, which was lit by dozens of candles that cast dancing shadows on the walls. Laura looked around in wonder, taking in the fresh flowers on the dresser, the new quilts on the bed, the curtains that had been washed and pressed until they looked brand new. "Frank, this is lovely," she breathed. "I wanted everything to be perfect for you," he said, suddenly looking nervous. "Laura, I need you to know that I will never take you for granted. I will spend every day of my life making sure you know how loved and valued you are." Laura turned to him, reaching up to cup his face in her hands. "I know that already. You show me every single day with your words and actions. I trust you, Frank, completely." What followed was a wedding night filled with tenderness and passion, with whispered declarations and gentle discoveries. They came together as two people who had both known loneliness and loss, who had both survived hard times, and who had found in each other a love worth believing in. Afterward, lying wrapped in Frank's arms with her head on his chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart, Laura felt a peace she had never known before. This was where she belonged. This was home. The months that followed were some of the happiest of Laura's life. She threw herself into making the ranch house truly theirs, adding touches of warmth and comfort to every room. She and Rosa worked side by side, developing a close friendship that went beyond employer and employee. Miguel taught her about the cattle and horses, and she learned to ride well enough to sometimes accompany Frank on his rounds of the ranch. But it was her relationship with Frank that truly flourished. They talked for hours about everything and nothing, sharing their hopes and dreams, their fears and insecurities. They laughed together over silly things and supported each other through the inevitable challenges that came with ranch life. Frank was everything Samuel had not been: steady, reliable, attentive, and present. He noticed when Laura was tired and insisted she rest. He praised her cooking and thanked her for her work. He asked her opinion on ranch decisions and actually listened to her input. He made her feel like a true partner in every sense of the word. In late summer, Laura began to suspect she might be pregnant. At first, she said nothing, wanting to be sure before she got Frank's hopes up. But as the signs became impossible to ignore, she finally worked up the courage to tell him. She chose a moment when they were alone together, sitting on the porch in the evening after a long day of work. The setting sun painted the mountains in shades of purple and gold, and a cool breeze brought the scent of pine and wildflowers. "Frank, I have something to tell you," she began, her heart hammering in her chest. He turned to her immediately, concern in his eyes. "What is it? Is something wrong?" "No, nothing is wrong. Actually, something is very right. Frank, I am going to have a baby. We are going to have a baby." The expression on Frank's face went through several rapid changes: surprise, disbelief, and then pure joy. "A baby? Laura, are you certain?" "I am certain. I have suspected for a few weeks, but I wanted to be absolutely sure before I told you." Frank pulled her into his arms, holding her so tightly she could barely breathe. When he pulled back, there were tears in his eyes. "A baby, our baby. Laura, you have made me the happiest man alive. I love you so much." "I love you too," Laura whispered, her own eyes wet. "I am a little scared, but mostly I am just happy. We are going to be a family, Frank." "We are already a family," Frank corrected gently. "But yes, we are going to expand that family, and I could not be more thrilled." The news of the pregnancy brought even more joy to the ranch. Rosa was beside herself with excitement, immediately beginning to plan for the baby's arrival. Miguel carved a beautiful wooden cradle during the long winter evenings. And Frank became almost comically protective, constantly worrying about Laura overdoing it and trying to prevent her from doing any heavy work. "Frank, I am pregnant, not made of glass," Laura protested one day when he tried to stop her from hanging laundry. "Women have been having babies since the beginning of time. I will not break." I know," Frank said, looking sheepish. "I just cannot help it. You and this baby are the most important things in my life. I want to keep you both safe." His concern was endearing, even when it became a bit excessive. Laura learned to humor him when she could and gently but firmly push back when he went too far. As winter approached again, nearly a year after Laura had been evicted from her home in Georgetown, she found herself reflecting on everything that had happened. So much had changed, and all for the better. She had a husband who adored her, a home she loved, work that gave her purpose, and a baby on the way. She had gone from desperation and despair to contentment and joy. One snowy December afternoon, she and Frank made a trip into Georgetown for supplies. As they drove through town, they passed the house where Laura had once lived. Someone else lived there now, smoke curling from the chimney, children's toys scattered in the yard. "You ever regret it?" Frank asked softly. "Everything that happened, the hard times that led you to my ranch." Laura looked at the house, thinking about the woman she had been a year ago, frightened, alone, and hopeless. Then she looked at Frank, at his strong profile and the love in his eyes when he glanced at her. "No," she said firmly, "I do not regret any of it, because all of it led me to you, to our life together. I would go through it all again if I knew it would end with us." Frank reached over and squeezed her hand. "I feel the same way. Sometimes I think about what would have happened if I had not heard about your eviction that day, if I had not gone to find you. The thought terrifies me." "But you did," Laura reminded him. "You came to me in my darkest hour and offered me hope when I had none. You saved me, Frank." "We saved each other," Frank corrected. "I was so lonely before you came, Laura. I did not even realize how much until you showed me what it felt like to have someone to share my life with. You brought light and warmth into my world. You still do, every single day." They completed their shopping and headed back to the ranch as snow began to fall, soft and gentle. Laura leaned against Frank's shoulder, feeling their baby move inside her, and thought about how perfect this moment was. She was heading home, truly home, with the man she loved beside her and their future unfolding before them like the road ahead. The baby, a healthy boy with Frank's blue eyes and Laura's dark hair, was born on a cold February morning, exactly 1 year after Laura had been evicted. They named him Samuel Frank, honoring both the past and the future. Frank held his son with such tenderness and awe that Laura fell in love with him all over again. Rosa declared herself the baby's unofficial grandmother and was constantly hovering, eager to help with anything and everything. Miguel carved toys and told stories in Spanish that the baby was too young to understand but seemed to enjoy anyway. Laura recovered quickly from the birth, and within a few weeks, she was back to helping run the household, now with a baby on her hip or sleeping in a basket nearby. She found that she loved being a mother, loved watching Frank with their son, loved the way their family was growing and evolving. That spring, Frank surprised her by hiring a young woman from town to help with the housework, giving Laura more time to focus on the baby and rest when she needed to. "You do too much," he insisted when Laura protested. "Let someone else help with the heavy work. You have a baby to care for now, and I want you to be able to enjoy this time with him." The young woman, Jane, was sweet and hardworking, and Laura found herself grateful for the help. It allowed her to spend long afternoons with Samuel, watching him grow and change, marveling at every new sound and expression. As Samuel's first birthday approached, Laura and Frank discussed expanding their family further. "I would love to have more children," Frank said one evening as they watched Samuel toddle around the parlor, still unsteady on his new legs. "Maybe 4 or 5 if we are blessed." "4 or 5, Laura laughed. "You want to run a ranch and raise a small army. Why not? This ranch is going to need heirs, and I want Samuel to have siblings. I always wished I had fewer brothers growing up because there were so many of us, but now I am glad I had them. Family is important." Laura smiled, watching their son. "I agree. I always wanted a big family." "Let us see what happens. But maybe give me a little time before the next one." "Of course," Frank agreed, pulling her close. "We have all the time in the world." But as it turned out, they did not need to wait long. By the time Samuel celebrated his first birthday with a small party attended by Rosa, Miguel, Jane, and several neighbors, Laura was pregnant again. This time, Frank was even more protective, if that was possible, and Laura found his hovering both annoying and endearing. Their second child, a daughter they named Rose Emma after Rosa and Laura's mother Emma, was born in the early spring. She was a tiny, delicate thing with wisps of blonde hair and a surprisingly loud cry. Samuel, now nearly 2, was fascinated by his baby sister and wanted to help with everything. The ranch continued to prosper under Frank's careful management. He expanded the herd as planned and built a second barn. He hired 2 more hands to help with the increased workload, young men from town who were hardworking and reliable. The household was busy and sometimes chaotic, but it was filled with love and laughter. Laura sometimes thought back to that terrible February day when she had stood in the doorway of her old house, watching her possessions being carried into the snow, certain her life was over. She remembered the desperation, the fear, the absolute certainty that she had nothing left to live for. And then she thought about Frank appearing like a miracle, offering her not just shelter but hope, not just employment but friendship, not just a warm cabin but a place in his life and his heart. He had said he had a warm cabin and a bigger heart, and he had proven both to be true every single day since. Years passed in a blur of busy, happy activity. Samuel grew into a sturdy, curious boy who followed Frank around the ranch, eager to learn everything about cattle and horses and the land. Rose became a sweet, gentle child who loved helping Laura in the kitchen and listening to Rosa's stories. 2 more children followed. Another boy, Thomas Henry, and then finally another girl, Catherine Jane, named after Laura's late mother-in-law and their helpful household assistant Jane, who had become a dear friend over the years. The house was constantly full of noise and activity, with children running in and out, tracking mud and bringing in wildflowers, arguing over toys, and then making up just as quickly. Rosa and Miguel were getting older now, but they refused to slow down, doting on the children and helping in whatever ways they could. Frank thrived as a father. He was patient and kind, firm when necessary but always fair. He taught his sons to work hard and respect the land. He taught his daughters to be strong and independent. He made sure all his children knew they were loved unconditionally, and through it all, his love for Laura never wavered. If anything, it grew deeper with each passing year. He still looked at her like she was the most beautiful woman in the world, even when she was covered in flour or mud or baby spit up. He still found ways to surprise her with small kindnesses. A handful of wildflowers, a new book from town, a few hours off to rest while he watched the children. Laura felt the same way about him. She loved watching him with their children, loved the way he still sought her opinion on ranch matters, loved falling asleep beside him each night and waking up in his arms each morning. Their marriage was not perfect because no marriage is, but it was built on a foundation of genuine love, respect, and partnership. One evening when Samuel was 10, Rose was 8, Thomas was 6, and Catherine was 4, the family gathered on the porch after supper to watch the sunset. The children were unusually quiet, tired from a long day of playing, and they leaned against their parents contentedly. "Papa," Samuel said suddenly, "tell us again how you and Mama met." Frank and Laura exchanged a smile. The children loved this story and asked to hear it regularly. "Well," Frank began, "it was a very cold day in February about 10 years ago. Your mother had just lost her home and she had nowhere to go. And Papa heard about it and came to help her," Rose chimed in, knowing the story by heart. "That's right," Laura continued. "I was standing in the doorway and I thought my life was over. I had lost everything. And then your father appeared, covered in snow, and he said something I will never forget." "What did he say?" Catherine asked, even though she had heard the answer many times. "He said, 'I've got a warm cabin and a bigger heart,'" Laura recited, her voice soft with memory. "And he offered me a place to stay, even though he did not know me at all." "Because Papa is the best man in the whole world," Thomas declared, hugging Frank's arm. Frank laughed, but his eyes were suspiciously bright. "I just did what anyone should do. I helped someone who needed help. But I got far more than I gave because helping your mother brought me the greatest blessing of my life." "What blessing?" Samuel asked. All of you, Frank said simply, looking around at his family. Your mother, you children, this life we have built together. I am the luckiest man alive. Laura leaned her head on Frank's shoulder, watching the sun sink behind the mountains, painting the sky in brilliant colors. Her 4 children were clustered around them, safe and loved. The ranch stretched out before them, prosperous and beautiful. And beside her was the man who had seen her at her lowest point and offered not just help, but love. I am the lucky one, she whispered, just loud enough for Frank to hear. You gave me everything when I had nothing. You showed me what real love looks like. Frank kissed the top of her head. We gave each other everything. That is what love is, Laura. Giving and receiving in equal measure, building something together that neither of us could build alone. As the stars began to appear in the darkening sky, the family sat together in comfortable silence. The years had been kind to them, full of hard work and simple joys, challenges overcome and dreams realized. Frank and Laura's love had started in desperation and hardship, but it had grown into something strong and enduring, a love that would carry them through whatever the future held. Eventually, the children grew too sleepy to stay awake any longer, and Laura and Frank herded them inside for baths and bedtime stories. After the children were all tucked in, Frank and Laura returned to the porch, drawn by the beauty of the star-filled night. Do you ever wonder what your life would have been like if things had been different? Laura asked, snuggling close to Frank for warmth. If you had not come to find me that day. Frank was quiet for a moment, considering. Sometimes, but I cannot imagine it, honestly. You and our children, this life, it all feels so right, so meant to be. I think somehow, someway we would have found each other. The universe would not have let us miss each other. That is a romantic notion, Laura said with a smile. I am a romantic at heart, Frank admitted. At least where you are concerned. You bring out that side of me. They stood there together, looking up at the vast expanse of stars overhead. Somewhere in the darkness, an owl hooted, and from the barn came the gentle sounds of horses settling for the night. The air smelled of pine and wood smoke and the promise of spring. I love you, Frank Garrett, Laura said. More than I ever thought it was possible to love someone. You saved my life that day, and every day since, you have given me reasons to be glad you did. I love you too, Laura Garrett, Frank replied. You are my heart, my home, my everything. I would choose you 1,000 times over in this life and any other. They kissed under the stars, 2 people who had found each other in the midst of hardship and built a love that would last a lifetime. The ranch around them was quiet, the children sleeping peacefully inside, the cattle safe in their pastures. Everything they had worked for, everything they had dreamed of, was right here in this moment. As they finally turned to go inside, Frank paused to look back at the view one more time. The mountains rose dark against the star-filled sky, and the valley stretched out below, silver in the moonlight. This was his land, his home, his legacy to pass on to his children. But none of it would mean anything without Laura by his side. She was the reason he worked so hard, the reason everything mattered. She had come to him broken and desperate, and together they had built something beautiful out of the ashes of her past life. In the years that followed, the Garrett family continued to grow and prosper. Samuel eventually took over much of the day-to-day running of the ranch. Showing the same dedication and work ethic his father had always demonstrated. Rose surprised everyone by developing a talent for training horses, eventually building a small but profitable side business breeding and selling quality stock. Thomas proved to have a head for numbers and took over managing the ranch's finances. And Catherine, the youngest, became a teacher in Georgetown, though she returned to the ranch every weekend without fail. Frank and Laura aged gracefully together. their hair turning gray, their faces acquiring the lines that come from a lifetime of smiles and laughter. They remained devoted to each other, still holding hands when they walked, still stealing kisses when they thought no one was looking. Rosa and Miguel eventually passed on, first Miguel, and then Rosa a year later, unable to live long without her beloved husband. Their loss was felt deeply by the entire family, and Frank and Laura made sure to keep their memory alive by sharing stories about them with the grandchildren, who began to arrive as their own children married and started families. The ranch that Frank had built with his own 2 hands became a gathering place for the extended family. Holidays and birthdays brought everyone together, filling the house with noise and chaos and love. Frank and Laura's initial family of 4 children grew to include sons and daughters-in-law, and eventually a dozen grandchildren. On their 20th wedding anniversary, Frank took Laura back to the meadow where he had first kissed her, where they had been married, where so many of their important moments had taken place. The wildflowers were in full bloom, painting the grass with splashes of color. 20 years, Frank marveled, holding both of Laura's hands in his. It has gone by so fast. The best years of my life, Laura said, every single one of them. Do you remember what I said to you that first day when I found you at your old house? You said you had a warm cabin and a bigger heart, Laura replied. And you were right on both counts. Your cabin was warm, but your heart was even warmer. It was big enough to hold me and all the children and all the grandchildren. It is still growing, still making room for more. Frank pulled her close, and they danced together in the meadow with no music except the wind in the grass and the birdsong in the trees. They were both older now, their steps not quite as sure as they once were, but their love was as strong as ever. I would do it all again, Frank said. Every bit of it. The hard work, the long days, the sleepless nights with sick children, all of it, as long as it meant I got to spend my life with you. So would I, Laura agreed. You gave me a second chance at life, Frank. You gave me hope when I had none, love when I thought I would never love again, a family when I was utterly alone. How can I ever thank you for that? You thank me every day just by being you, Frank said simply. By loving me, by building this life with me, by giving me children and grandchildren and more joy than I ever imagined possible. You are my gift, Laura. You always have been. They stayed in the meadow until the sun began to set, talking about everything and nothing, reminiscing about the past and dreaming about the future. They talked about Samuel's plans to expand the herd again, about Rose's new colt that showed real promise, about Thomas's courtship of the banker's daughter in town, about Catherine's first year of teaching. They talked about their grandchildren, each one unique and precious. They talked about the ranch and how it had grown, how it would continue to grow long after they were gone. They talked about getting older and what that might mean, making plans and promises about how they would care for each other in the years to come. But mostly, they just enjoyed being together, holding each other close, grateful for every moment they had been given. As the stars began to appear overhead, Frank helped Laura back onto her horse, and they rode slowly back to the ranch. Lights glowed warmly in the windows of the house, and they could hear laughter and voices as their children and grandchildren gathered for the anniversary dinner Laura's daughters-in-law had insisted on preparing. Ready to go face the chaos? Frank asked with a grin. Always, Laura replied. As long as you are by my side. They rode into the yard together, and immediately children came running out to greet them, grandchildren clamoring for attention and hugs. Samuel helped his mother down from her horse while Rose took the reins. Thomas held the door open, and Catherine rushed forward to embrace them both. The house was filled with family, with food and laughter and love. Toasts were made, Stories were told and memories were shared. Frank and Laura sat at the head of the table, surrounded by the family they had created, the legacy they had built together. Late that night, after everyone had finally gone to bed or headed home, Frank and Laura sat together in their bedroom, the house finally quiet around them. "It has been a good life," Laura said softly. "The best life," Frank agreed. "And it is not over yet. We have years ahead of us still, years to watch our grandchildren grow, maybe even meet some great-grandchildren, years to keep building and dreaming and loving." "I look forward to every single one of those years," Laura said, "because I know I will spend them with you." Frank pulled her close, and they lay down together, wrapped in each other's arms just as they had been for 20 years, just as they would be for all the years to come. Outside, the wind whispered through the pines, and the stars wheeled slowly across the sky. The ranch slept peacefully, the cattle safe in their pastures, the horses dozing in their stalls. Everything was exactly as it should be. And in the main house, in the bedroom they had shared for 2 decades, Frank and Laura Garrett slept soundly, secure in the knowledge that they were exactly where they belonged, with exactly who they were meant to be with. The years continued to pass, as years do. Frank and Laura grew older together. Their children had more children, and the ranch prospered under their collective care. Through good times and hard times, through droughts and harsh winters, through births and deaths and all the joys and sorrows that make up a life, Frank and Laura remained devoted to each other. They never forgot that cold February day when their lives had intersected, when Frank had offered Laura a warm cabin and proven he had an even bigger heart. It was the foundation on which everything else was built, the moment when 2 lonely people had found each other and chosen love over fear, hope over despair. And when they were very old, sitting together on the porch they had sat on countless times before, watching yet another sunset paint the mountains gold, Frank took Laura's weathered hand in his and said, "I would do it all again." "So would I," Laura replied, leaning her white head against his shoulder. "Every single moment, because they all led me to you, and you are worth everything." They sat together as the stars came out one by one, as they had done thousands of times before. And when they finally rose to go inside, they walked hand in hand, still partners, still lovers, still best friends after all these years. Their love story had begun in hardship, grown through challenges, and endured through time. It was a love built on kindness and compassion, on respect and partnership, on the simple truth that 2 people can build something beautiful together if they are willing to work for it. Frank Garrett had offered Laura Morgan a warm cabin and a bigger heart, and in return, she had given him everything that mattered: love, family, home, and a life worth living. Together, they had created something that would last long after they were gone, a legacy of love that would carry on through their children and their children's children. It was, in the end, exactly the kind of love story that the Wild West was made for. Hard-won, deeply felt, and absolutely true. And as Frank and Laura lived out their remaining years together, surrounded by the family they had built and the land they loved, they knew without doubt that every hardship they had faced had been worth it, because it had led them to each other and to this beautiful life they shared.